I need you to understand something before I start. I'm not a man who holds grudges. I never have been. I was raised by a father who believed that the best response to someone doing you wrong was to do better, move faster, and let your results speak for everything your mouth wanted to say. I carried that with me for 36 years, and it served me well. Until the year I met Natalie. And by the time it was over, I had not just let my results speak. I had let a federal audit, a terminated partnership agreement, a civil judgment, and the complete collapse of everything she had spent 4 years building speak for me. My father would have been proud. Eventually, my name is not important. You can call me Jordan. I was 36 years old, the co-founder of a logistics software company called Vantage Systems, and I was about to discover that the person I had built it with had been quietly and methodically stealing from it. And from me, for 2.5 years. This is the full story. I started Vantage Systems when I was 31 with $40,000 of personal savings, a laptop, a sublease on a desk in a shared office space, and an idea I had been carrying around for 3 years while working in supply chain management at a large distribution company. The idea was not complicated. It was a middleware platform that allowed mid-sized logistics companies to integrate their existing warehouse management systems with third-party carriers without expensive custom development. The problem it solved was real, the market was underserved, and I had spent 3 years watching operations directors at my previous employer struggle with exactly the integration gap Vantage was designed to close. I built the first version myself over 8 months. Then I needed someone who could handle the business development and client-facing side while I focused on the product. Building software and selling software are two entirely different skills, and I was honest enough with myself to know that I was better at one than the other. I found Natalie through a mutual contact in the industry. She was 33, had 5 years of enterprise software sales experience, an MBA, and a way of talking about the market that told me she genuinely understood the problem we were solving and not just the pitch. We met 3 times over 2 weeks. On the third meeting, I offered her a co-founder equity stake in exchange for sweat equity and a deferred salary draw until we hit our first revenue milestone. She accepted on the spot. We shook hands across a coffee shop table on a Tuesday morning, and I thought, this is the person who is going to help me build something real. I was right about that. For the first 18 months, Natalie was exceptional. She closed our first 3 enterprise clients, built a sales process from nothing, represented the company at industry conferences with a credibility and polish that the product deserved, but that I could not have delivered in that context myself. We hit our first revenue milestone 14 months in. We hired our first 2 employees. We moved into a real office. We opened a joint business bank account and established the financial infrastructure of a company that was beginning to look with some confidence like it was going to work. I trusted her with the finances because she had the MBA and I did not, because she had handled the client contracts and understood the revenue structure, and because we were partners. That is what partnership means. You divide the work according to who is best positioned to do it, and you trust each other with your respective domains. That trust was the thing she needed most, and she had spent 18 months earning it before she started using it. The first indication that something was wrong came from an accountant named Dennis who we had brought in to handle our quarterly bookkeeping and tax preparation. Dennis was 61 years old, had been doing small business accounting for 30 years, and had the specific quality of someone who has looked at enough numbers to notice when a pattern is slightly off in a way he cannot immediately explain. He called me on a Thursday afternoon in October, about 2.5 years into business, and said, "Jordan, I want to go through some of the operating expense categorizations with you. There are a few line items I want to understand better." I said, "Sure, what are you looking at?" He said, "There are recurring charges in the vendor services category that I cannot match to any vendor in your contracts file. Over the past 6 months, the total comes to around $38,000. I assumed there was a straightforward explanation, but I wanted to ask before I finalized the quarter. I said, "Send me the line items." He sent them that afternoon. I looked at them for a long time. 17 separate charges across 6 months. Amounts ranging from $1,400 to $6,200. Vendor references that were either generic descriptions or abbreviated codes that did not match any vendor relationship I was aware of. I pulled up our vendor contracts file. None of the charges matched any active vendor. I called Dennis back and said, I need to pull the bank records for the past 2 years, not just 6 months. Can you help me build a complete picture? He said, I could start tomorrow. I said, start tonight if you can. He did. What Dennis produced over the following 4 days was one of the most methodical pieces of financial forensics I have ever seen. He pulled every bank statement, every credit card record, every vendor payment record going back 28 months. He built a spreadsheet that categorized every transaction and flagged every charge that could not be matched to a contract, an invoice, or a documented business purpose. The total came to $214,000. $214,000 over 28 months. Extracted in careful, irregular amounts. Never large enough individually to trigger an alert, but consistent enough to compound into a figure that, when I saw it in Dennis's spreadsheet at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, made me sit very still in my home office for a long time. I thought about the 18 months before the extraction started, the period when Natalie had been building trust and building the sales pipeline and building, simultaneously, the financial access and control she would need. I thought about the moment she had taken over the bookkeeping coordination with Dennis, 6 months into the partnership, because she said it made sense for the MBA to handle the financial administration. I had agreed immediately. It had seemed logical. I thought about every conversation we had ever had about the business, every meeting, every decision. I was looking for the seams in it, the places where the performance of partnership had shown its edges. I could not find many. That was the most unsettling part. She had been genuinely good at the job. The company was real, the clients were real, the growth was real. She had not sacrificed the business to steal from it. She had grown the business while stealing from it, because a growing business was a better vehicle for extraction than a struggling one. She was, in purely operational terms, extraordinarily good at what she had done. I sat in my home office until 2 in the morning. Then I did what I had learned to do when something genuinely important was in front of me. I made a list. The list had 3 sections. The first section was what I knew: the financial discrepancies, the amounts, the timeline, the vendor references, Dennis's documentation. The second section was what I needed to know: where the money had actually gone, whether she had acted alone or whether anyone else at the company had been involved, what the legal exposure looked like from every direction, what the company's position was with our clients and investors if this became public. The third section was what I needed to do and in what order. I stared at the third section for a long time. Then I wrote 3 words at the top of it: slow, documented, devastating. The following Monday morning, I arrived at the office at my normal time and said good morning to Natalie at her desk and asked her how the weekend was. She said it was good. She had been at a friend's birthday, asked how mine was. I said quiet, a lot of reading. We talked for 4 minutes about nothing important and then both went to our desks. I am telling you this because I want you to understand the level of control that what I was about to do required. I had spent Sunday night learning that my business partner had stolen $214,000 from me over 2.5 years. And on Monday morning, I said good morning and asked about her weekend. My father raised me right. That Monday, I called Patricia Shun. If that name sounds familiar, it is because Patricia Shun is the kind of lawyer that people in certain professional circles pass to each other quietly, like a resource you do not advertise because you want her available when you need her. She had been recommended to me 2 years earlier by a fellow founder who had dealt with an IP theft situation. I had never needed her until now. I called her from my car in the parking garage before going upstairs. I told her what Dennis had found. She asked me 11 questions in 4 minutes. Then she said, do not touch the financial systems. Do not confront her. Do not change any access permissions. Do not discuss this with anyone at the company. Can you come in at 5 today? I said, I will be there at 4:45. She was ready for me at 4:45. We spent 2 hours going through everything Dennis had sent me. At the end of the 2 hours, Patricia said, what you have here is embezzlement. Potentially also wire fraud, given that some of these transactions cross state lines through the payment processor. This is not a civil matter only. This is criminal exposure. I said, I understand. She said, I want to bring in a forensic accountant from our network to do an independent verification of Dennis's work and to trace where the money went. That is essential before anything else happens. Can you give me access to the financial records? I said, I will have everything to you by tomorrow morning. She said, one more thing. Does she have signatory authority on the business accounts? I said, yes. She said, first thing tomorrow, before you come to this office, call your bank and have a flag placed on any transaction over $1,000 requiring dual authorization. Do not remove or access yet. Just add the flag. Frame it to the bank as a routine control upgrade. Can you do that without her knowing? I said, yes. She said, good. Go home. Do not think about confronting her tonight. I went home. I did not confront her. I did not sleep much either. But I thought very clearly. The forensic accountant Patricia brought in was a woman named Sandra Okafor, who had spent 12 years as a federal auditor before going into private practice. She was thorough in a way that I found both reassuring and slightly frightening. She spent 6 days going through everything and produced a report that was 62 pages long and included a complete transaction trace for every dollar Dennis had flagged. The money had gone to 3 places. The first was a personal account in Natalie's name at a different bank from the one she used for her salary draws. $91,000 over 28 months. The second was an LLC that Natalie had registered 18 months into our partnership under a name that bore no obvious connection to her. The LLC had a business bank account. $109,000 had been paid to this LLC from Vantage's operating account as vendor service fees. The LLC had no employees, no website, no documented services, and no business activity of any kind other than receiving payment from us. The third destination was the most significant. $14,000 had been paid to a company registration service and a domain registrar. Sandra pulled the registrations. Natalie had incorporated a company called ClearPath Logistics Solutions 8 months ago. ClearPath had a website. ClearPath had a product overview that described a middleware integration platform for mid-sized logistics companies. ClearPath had 3 listed team members, one of whom was Natalie under a slightly different version of her name. She had not just been stealing from Vantage. She had been funding the construction of a direct competitor using our own operating capital. I read Sandra's report 3 times. Then I called Patricia and said, how do we do this? Patricia said, carefully, completely, and in the right sequence. Come in tomorrow morning. Bring Dennis. The sequence took 4 weeks to execute, and I want to walk you through every step because every step mattered. Week 1. Patricia's firm sent formal written notice to Natalie's personal attorney. Patricia had identified who represented Natalie in a prior business matter through public filings, informing them that Vantage Systems had identified evidence of financial misconduct and was in the process of completing a forensic review prior to determining its legal response. The letter did not specify amounts or details. It was designed to achieve one thing: to ensure that Natalie could not later claim she had not been given the opportunity to engage legal counsel before proceedings began. Patricia called this closing the notice gap, and she was meticulous about it. Natalie's attorney called Patricia's office the following morning. Patricia did not take the call. Week 2. Patricia filed a civil complaint against Natalie individually and against the LLC she had used as a payment vehicle. The complaint alleged embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and unjust enrichment. The filing included Sandra's 62-page report as a primary exhibit. The complaint also named ClearPath Logistics Solutions as a related party and sought injunctive relief, preventing ClearPath from operating until the court could determine whether its capitalization had been derived from misappropriated funds. The injunction request was granted within 72 hours by a judge who, Patricia told me afterward, had read Sandra's report over a lunch break and called it one of the cleaner forensic accounting documents she had seen in a commercial case. ClearPath's website went offline the morning after the injunction was served. Week 2 also included something I had not anticipated, but that Patricia had planned for from the beginning. Sandra's report had identified that several of the wire transfers involved amounts and patterns that met the federal threshold for mandatory referral to law enforcement. Patricia had prepared a referral package for the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She walked me through it and asked me to authorize the referral. I said, Is this going to complicate the civil case? She said no. It is going to accelerate everything. Federal involvement changes the calculus for her completely. I said, send it. The referral went out on a Wednesday. Week 3 was externally the quietest week. Internally, it was the week I had the conversation I had been dreading most. I sat down with our 2 employees, both of whom had been with the company for over a year, both of whom I respected enormously, and told them what had happened. Not everything. Enough. I told them the company was financially secure, that the discrepancies that had been discovered had been identified and were being addressed legally, and that their positions were not in any danger. I told them I was telling them because they deserved to know that the turbulence they were about to see publicly was not a sign that the company was in trouble. Both of them, separately, said some version of the same thing. I always wondered about some of the vendor charges. I filed that away. Week 3 also included a conversation with our 3 enterprise clients. I called each of them personally. I did not go into detail. I said that we had identified a governance issue at the partnership level that we were resolving, that it had no impact on the product, the service, or their contracts, and that I wanted them to hear it from me directly before anything became public. All 3 said they appreciated the call. 2 of them said their confidence in the company was unchanged. The third said she had had a gut feeling something was off for a while and was glad it was being addressed. Week 4 was when everything became public and simultaneous. The civil complaint had been a matter of public record since filing, but had not attracted attention. On a Tuesday morning of week 4, 3 things happened within the same 6-hour window. The FBI opened a formal investigation, and Natalie received a federal target letter. Her attorney, who had still not been able to reach Patricia to discuss settlement, received notification of the investigation simultaneously. Patricia's firm issued a press release to 3 industry trade publications announcing the civil filing and the injunction against ClearPath. The release included a summary of Sandra's findings and described the case as an ongoing matter of corporate governance significance in the logistics software sector. And I sent a personal email to every contact in the logistics and supply chain industry who had Natalie's name in their network. Not as an attack, but as a factual notification that ClearPath Logistics Solutions was subject to an active civil injunction and a federal financial investigation, and that anyone who had been approached by that entity about a business relationship should be aware of the proceedings. Natalie's attorney called Patricia 4 times that Tuesday. Patricia took the 4th call. The negotiation that followed was not long. When you're facing a civil judgment, a federal investigation, and an industry-wide notification simultaneously, the leverage for extended negotiation is limited. Natalie's attorney proposed a settlement figure at 40 cents on the dollar. Patricia said no. He proposed 60 cents. Patricia said no. He said his client was prepared to go to 75 cents with a payment plan. Patricia said our position was full restitution of the $214,000. Full restitution of the legal and forensic costs, which at that point were just over $42,000, a formal signed acknowledgement of the conduct, a permanent non-compete in the logistics software space for 5 years, and Natalie's full cooperation with the federal investigation. He said that was not a negotiation, that was a surrender. Patricia said, yes. There was a pause. Then he said he would call back. He called back the next morning and said his client would accept the terms with one modification. She wanted the payment plan spread over 36 months rather than a lump sum. Patricia said she would accept 36 months with a personal guarantee and a UCC lien on Natalie's personal assets as security for the payment obligation. He accepted. The agreement was signed on a Friday afternoon. I was not in the room. I was at the office reviewing the Q4 roadmap with our development contractor. The federal investigation took 11 months. I cooperated fully, provided every document Sandra had produced, made myself available for every interview the investigators requested, and otherwise stayed out of the way and let them do their work. Natalie pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud. The federal sentencing guidelines for that count, given the amount involved and the duration of the conduct, resulted in a sentence of 18 months of supervised release, a fine, and a formal order of restitution that incorporated the civil settlement terms into the federal judgment, giving them the enforcement weight of a criminal court order rather than a civil one. Her attorney had not, apparently, anticipated that the federal plea would make the civil settlement terms harder to walk back from. Patricia had anticipated it. It was, she told me afterward with characteristic understatement, part of the sequencing. ClearPath Logistics Solutions was never relaunched. The injunction became permanent when the civil case concluded. The domain expired and was not renewed. I want to tell you where Vantage Systems is now, because I think it is the most important part of the story. The company did not collapse. I want to be very clear about that, because I think people assume that when something like this happens to a small company, the company dies. It does not have to. We lost time. We lost energy. We lost capital that should have gone into product development and instead went into legal proceedings and forensic accounting and the exhausting work of managing a crisis while simultaneously running a business. Those are real costs, and I do not want to minimize them. But the product was real. The client relationships were real. The market problem we were solving was real. Natalie had been smart enough to grow the business while stealing from it, which meant that when she was gone, the business was still there. 12 months after the settlement, Vantage Systems closed a series of funding round. The investors had done their due diligence, which meant they had read about the litigation, and they had invested anyway. Two of them told me, independently, that the way we had handled the situation had actually increased their confidence in the company's governance and in my judgment as a founder. I brought in a new head of business development 6 months after Natalie's departure. His name is Marcus, and he is methodical and straightforward and occasionally boring in the best possible way, and I value all of those qualities more than I have words to express. Vantage Systems currently has 11 employees, 3 enterprise clients, and 2 new contracts signed in the past quarter. We are growing. We are building something real. On the day the federal plea was entered, Dennis, our accountant, the man who had called me on a Thursday afternoon and said there were some line items he wanted to understand better, sent me a text message that said, "Saw the news. Good outcome. You handled it right." I thought about that text for a long time. You handled it right. For words from a 61-year-old accountant who had been looking at numbers long enough to know when they told the truth and when they did not. I think that is the only review that matters. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave a comment. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was working against you the whole time? What did you do? How did you handle the morning after you found out? I want to hear from you. And if you're new here, this is Reddit Confessions. Subscribe. A new story drops every single week, and I promise you, we never run out.